Hi everyone, this is audap. Let's continue our game of Iwaihime on PC. Did she not get any sleep at all last night?
ちょっと夢見が悪くて。でも横にはなってたんだよ。だから大丈夫。
無理しないで休んだ方が。
いいの。家より学校の方が安全だと思うから。学校ってほら大勢いるじゃない。大勢いれば変な人もだしにくいだろうし。
What was Kiko talking about? Though her features were shaped by exhaustion, her eyes had an odd glint to them. I'd never seen a look like that before, or from her before. For a moment, I considered forcing her to rest if I had to, but Kiko probably wouldn't have listened. However, that was convenient for both of us. I could bring her to the infirmary to see Miss Hinagata right away. If it was just a cold, she'd just have to rest, and I'd have peace of mind. If it wasn't, then Miss Hinagata would be the only one I could turn to anyway.
キコちゃん、皆勤賞を狙ってるんだったっけね。
だから休めないの。
でも念のため保健室で雛形先生に見てもらおう。
本当にただの寝不足だってば。大丈夫だよ。
I didn't believe her. Normally, she'd look me right in the eye, yet she'd avoided glancing at me this whole time. But I knew worrying about it wasn't going to solve anything. I just had to get her to the school infirmary and leave the rest to Miss Hinagata. We descended the stairwell and straddled our bikes. This was Suzumu. Suzumu, I could tell. So long as I kept a firm grip on my mind, I could actually recognize him as Suzumu. But this whole time, I'd seen him as a blob. That couldn't be. My eyes had to be playing tricks on me. That, or I was back in that same horrible daydream. If I focused hard, Suzumu appeared the same as always. However, if I took my eyes off him for even a second, he turned into a blob again.
僕の顔何かある？目やにでもついてるかな？
そんなこと全然ないよ。ジロジロ見ちゃってごめんね。
If I let my guard down, not only did I see blobs, but I could also smell sour sweat. But at least Suzumu was fine. I could perceive him as his usual self so long as I honed my senses. The world was filled with those blobs, juices, and the rank stench of sweat. I knew the truth. There was no way they were blobs. All of them were ordinary people. They had to be. But since this morning, nearly everyone looked like one of those hideous flesh beasts. And I was probably the only one who saw them like that, because no one else was panicking. No one else found anything strange. I was the only one who could see this messed up world of meat. The Iwaimoto shopping district was full of bikes racing to school or the train station, and nearly all of them appeared as blobs to me and me alone. The foul odors they spewed were like open garbage cans on a hot summer day. I almost threw up several times. But it wasn't like I saw every single person as blobs. It seemed it only applied to men. Girls and young boys looked normal to me. But all other men appeared as hideous blobs.
おはよう、夏くん。 Suzuhara! Great morning!
Suzumu really was the only exception to that. The hideous blob he called Natsu was apparently Atsura. Unlike Suzumu, he only appeared as a blob no matter how hard I steeled my mind. Well, no, Suzumu, me, and that disgusting bag of meat riding a bike. Headed for school like every other day. The thing would talk to me from time to time, but I couldn't bring myself to look at it. Though I knew it had to be Atsura, I couldn't bear it. But that was just because my eyes, brain, or heart had gone mad. So I resisted the urge to break out into a cold sweat and fought my hardest to endure this horrific daily life. Even amidst all this, it was still safer at school. He couldn't lay a hand on me while I was there. But what was I going to do after? I could barely stand the foul stench of the blobs as it was. Girls and blobs rode their bikes through the school gate, one after the next. I felt like I was going to lose my mind. This was the first time I'd had a daydream this awful. I needed to wake up, or I'd go insane. By the time I parked my bike, my mind had been scrambled by madness and the foul stench. If someone told me this was hell, I'd believe it. Still, this was better. They were just blobs. They had no intention of harming me. So I had to endure. But I was reaching my limit. I'd managed to hold it back so far, but the bike lot was poorly ventilated and filled with the acrid reek of the blobs. I gripped my stomach as it churned. But it didn't help. I couldn't stand it any longer. And a moment later, everything I'd been holding back up to this point finally broke loose. At first, I had no idea what had just happened. Kiko must have thrown up or something, and she had the most unfortunate luck of getting vomit on a delinquent's clothes. Naturally, he was furious and grabbed Kiko by the collar. That act had likely evoked her wrath. Kiko headbutted him right in the face, sending blood gushing from his nose to his chin. Enraged, the delinquent lunged for Kiko, but she headbutted him again. His blood splattered onto Kiko's face, leaving blotches behind. The nearby girls screamed when they finally noticed the brutal fight.
何しやがったこら構わねえぶっ殺しちまえ
That wasn't a scream. It was a war cry. Kiko's face was a terrifying visage of indignation and repugnance. I wanted to stop the fight right away, but I couldn't get through the ring of confused students surrounding them with their bikes. The chaos spread and intensified in that time. At first, the delinquents were reluctant to get in a serious fight with a girl, but all such reservations faded once they saw the merciless depths of Kiko's berserker state. I knew Kiko had experience fighting, but this was more like the rampage of a rabid animal. There was no human dignity to be found in any of this violence. She attacked like a panicked beast who had been pushed against the wall by hunters, like a cornered rat fighting back.
やべえよこいつ頭いってるぜいってえよ早く先生呼んでくれよ
This was no fight. She struck, clawed, and relentlessly bit the delinquents. She was probably trying to bite their ears off. It was like she was fighting for her life. Kiko was a frenzied animal driven by fright. That was right. This wasn't rage. It was terror that spurred her. Kiko didn't do this because she wanted to. She'd lost herself in some kind of fear. I finally made my way through the ring of bicycles.
キコちゃん、やめるんだ。
Kiko howled at the top of her lungs. She'd completely lost sight of herself. Kiko trampled over a bicycle as she charged at me. I silently asked for her forgiveness, and then... Though my fist was not for fighting, I buried it deep into Kiko's soft abdomen. I winced. It must have hurt a lot. Kiko gripped her stomach as she fell to the ground, moaning with pain.
ごめんね、キコちゃん。仕方なかった。
A group of muscular teachers finally showed up. To them, it must have looked as though the delinquents had gotten into a personal quarrel that Kiko had been caught up in.
俺たち何もしてねえよ。ハルミヤが急に噛みついてきたんすよ。嘘じゃねえっす。いいからこっち来い。ハルミヤ、大丈夫か。
待って、先生。
ああ、雛形先生。
Miss Hinagata's intuition was right. She thought the same as me. At this moment, Kiko was a feral beast who would attack anyone who carelessly approached her, even a teacher.
ハルミヤさん、私がわかる？怖がらないで。落ち着いて。
雛形先生、よかった。
ごめん、笹原君も来ないで。
はい。
As sad as it was, Kiko would attack me too if I got close. However, at least it seemed she bore no hostility towards Miss Hinagata. The two of them said a few words to each other. Before long, Miss Hinagata helped Kiko to her feet and headed for the infirmary. The delinquents were taken away by the stern-faced teachers, asserting they were victims all the way. All that remained were fallen bikes and a concrete floor splattered with blood. The students were dazed at first, but eventually all burst out into conversation. The teachers shouted at them to hurry to their classes.
さすが特攻隊長。グレートだね。
Despite his rousing words, Natsu had grown pale as well. According to rumors, some of the delinquents were taken to the hospital just to be safe. Kiko didn't return to the classroom even by lunch break. I heard she'd been confined to the guidance counselor's room, given that she was involved in that brawl. The classroom was abuzz with rumors about the onslaught this morning, as well as stories of Kiko's past. Miss Hinagata called for me during lunch. There was plenty I wanted to ask her.
ハルミヤさんは自宅に帰されたわ。
It seemed Kiko had regained her sanity earlier that day, but she insisted she didn't remember the fight at all. However, there was no doubt she started the fight and injured multiple delinquents. What normally would have been a fight between two parties had turned into a one-sided slaughter. Kiko had gotten through with a few scrapes. On the other hand, the delinquents were left bleeding. It seemed the stories of some of them being sent to the hospital were true. Unfortunately, they had all kept their silence. They were probably too proud to admit they'd been so thoroughly beaten by a girl.
先生方の話を漏れ聞く限りでは、このまま自宅謹慎になるかもね。
今のキコちゃんはしばらく家で休んだ方がいいと思います。先日の霊障の時から少し様子がおかしくて。
そのあたりの話、詳しく聞かせてくれる？
はい。
I told Miss Hinagata all about Kiko's abnormal behavior recently. About how even though her haunting should have ended when she woke from her daydream, its effects still lingered.
やっぱり僕の力が落ちているのでしょうか。
ススハラ君の力はこれまでの長い修行の積み重ねで培ったものよ。仮にススハラ君がここしばらく修行をサボっていたとしても、そうそう衰えるものではないはずなんだけど。それにあなたが修行をサボるわけもない。そうでしょ？
はい。
だったらススハラ君のせいじゃないわ。自分を責めないで。ススハラ君の想像通り、これは稀にある数日間尾を引くたちの悪い霊障かもしれないわ。私も昔覚えがあるし、シャチホコ部の他の子にも稀にあったことよ。他の子たちはたまたまこういう大騒ぎにはならなかったというだけのこと。
キコちゃんは今一人だと思うんですけど、大丈夫でしょうか？
私からお母さんに連絡して事情を話しておいたわ。心を許せる家族と一緒にいて、しばらく休養を取ればだいぶ良くなるはずよ。
According to Miss Hinagata, a power like the one I'd obtained through training in the divine tribute style dwelled in my family bonds too. A parent's love for their child could help ward off evil spirits as well. Mrs. Harumiya had told Miss Hinagata that Kiko had regained her calm and was now resting peacefully in bed. I found it hard to believe after witnessing that berserk state of hers, but I was a bit relieved. It seemed Kiko's mother was staying with her too.
受験へのストレスと恐怖から追い詰められてそういうストーリーにしておけば、関係者はとりあえず納得してくれると思うわ。学校も当事者の受験への影響を気にして大ごとにはならないように終わらせてくれるそうよ。
そうですか。よかった。
私の責任よ。ススハラ君から連絡があった時点でもっと何かできていたと思うわ。いつもの霊障などと軽々しく考えてこんなことになってしまった。取り返しのつかないミステイクよ。
僕にだって責任はあります。もっと早く喧嘩を止めることができていたら。
私の責任、ススハラ君は気にしちゃダメよ。彼女が少しでも不利益を受けないように全力を尽くすわ。
Give me just a little second.
もし鈴原くんも力を貸してくれるなら、これ以上みんなが春宮さんの話をしないようにしてあげてくれる？
もちろんです。
私の話はそれだけよ。くれぐれも気を病まないようにね。彼女のためを思うならしばらくの間気を使ってあげて。
はい。
さて、知り合いに根回しの電話をしなきゃね。穏便に済ませるようにいろいろとこれから大人の駆け引きがあるの。
はい。それでは失礼します。
I rose to my feet. For now, I could only pray Kiko's emotional scars healed as soon as possible. A haunting, huh? To think she, no they, had been suffering from something so painful all these years. I was supposed to have the power to save them. So much for that. I felt pathetic. I refused to let myself simply watch from the sidelines. I needed to train even harder, so that they would never suffer like this again.
そういえば先生、
何？
今年で9年目って何か心当たりありますか
Miss Hinagata's smile instantly dropped. Even I didn't know what it meant. I'd only heard Kiko say that after I punched her. I brought it up to Miss Hinagata in hopes she might get more out of it than me.
今朝、キコちゃんがそんなことをつぶやいてた気がして。9年目ってなんだろうって思いまして。
Miss Hinagata's face grew paler by the moment. She suddenly checked her calendar as though she'd remembered something.
平成年だから6、7、8、9年目。まさか。
Miss Hinagata crossed her arms in contemplation. I wanted to know what she was thinking, of course. But her eyebrows were so furrowed that I couldn't find the right time to ask.
9年目。模範囚は数ヶ月早く刑期が終わることもあるそうだし、ひょっとするともう。
何の話ですか？
これは霊障じゃないかもしれないわ。
どういうことですか？
Miss Hinagata crossed her arms again. After pondering for a minute, she finally broke her silence. The grim look in her eyes made it clear I was to repeat this to no one.
春宮さんには本人も思い出したくない気の毒な過去があるの。
The park was an all-you-can-play paradise for the children, their own personal kingdom. The swings were thrilling and they loved the slides. The sandbox was their canvas to craft castles and cakes right out of their dreams. Buckets and shovels were their paintbrushes. This particular park was the biggest one in the area, and there were always lots of children playing there. It wasn't just kids, of course. The place was also used by joggers, elderly folks taking a rest, and office workers on break. So the children played merrily as adults watched over them. The parents could also let their children play with each other with little to fear. So there was nothing odd about grown-ups sitting on the benches watching the children play. Furthermore, adults who frequented the park were recognized and accepted by the children. That obese man was one such adult. He was likely in his late 20s or early 30s. He had unusually childlike eyes and would always come to play with the children in the same worn-out gray sweatshirt. He was fond of playing with the girls and particularly enjoyed playing house with them. The girls wanted to play the part of the mother or older sister, but no one was lining up to play the father. And so it was that Mr. Daddy took the lead and played that role for them. They all loved him. Tsubakiko Harumiya was one of said girls and called him Daddy. There was a snack shop near the park popular with the kids that sold plenty of snacks for 10 yen. They ranged from salami flavored to salad flavored and even fish flavored. Most Japanese children had snacks like that, at least once or twice. Mr. Daddy would often buy a bag full of candy and give it out to the children in the park. This was why they all loved him.
パパ、おかえりなさい。
ただいま、つばきこちゃん。ほーら、素敵なお嫁さんはパパが帰ってきたらお帰りのチューをするんだぞ。
おかえりのチュー。
The young girl kissed the man on the cheek. He reciprocated with a kiss from his own thick lips.
つばきこちゃんにもチュー。
パパ、くちゅぐったい。ペロペロしたやだ。
The man moved his mouth away, leaving a trail of saliva on the girl's cheek. But the little girl, who knew nothing of malice at the time, didn't find that disgusting at all.
つばきこちゃんの将来の夢は素敵なお嫁さんになることだよね。
私、素敵なお嫁さんになるの。
じゃあパパといっぱいおままごとで練習しないとね。いっぱい練習しないと素敵なお嫁さんにはなれないんだよ。
つばきこ、いっぱい練習するね。パパ。
Two little girls playing house with Daddy was a game just as much as it was a way to learn about domestic responsibilities. But of course, that man was scum who took advantage of their innocence to make those girls do whatever he wanted. Tsubakiko was the cutest among the girls her age. That was why the man set his eye on her. Through candy and playing house under the name of wife training, the man grew closer and closer to Tsubakiko. Having an adult friend also made her feel superior to her peers. What's more, she believed that if she continued to train to be a wife, her dream would come true. Eventually, Tsubakiko started visiting the man's apartment. It was there that her full-blown wife training began.
愛し合う夫婦はこんなことをしてるんだよ。こんなことをしてあげると素敵なお嫁さんって褒めてもらえるよ。ほらほら、くすぐったがっちゃダメだよ、つばきこちゃん。つばきこちゃん、僕のお嫁さんになろうよ。つばきこちゃん、つばきこちゃん。つばきこちゃんは、つばきこちゃんは横になってるだけでいいからね。いいからね。つばきこちゃん。
どうしたの？落ち着いて。怖い夢を見たのね。かわいそうに。
Tsubakiko fell back on her bed and collapsed in agony, clawing at her head. It was like she was trying to tear out her own brain. Tsubakiko's mother had seen her like this 9 years before, so she knew painfully well what emotions were tormenting her daughter.
休刑10年、判決は懲役9年。そのクソデブは最後まで彼女とは友人同士で遊んでいただけだと主張しやがったわ。グダグダと上告してなおも罪を認めず、確定に随分と時間をかけたみたいよ。その上、幼い春宮さんは警察などで何度も男にされたこと、させられたことを口述させられたわ。それがどれほどヘドの出ることだったか。
Miss Hinagata trembled with a rage I'd never seen from her before. I was utterly stunned by what I heard, so much I even forgot to feel anger.
でも彼女にとって一番ショックだったことは、信じていたものに裏切られたことだった。された仕打ちがじゃない、彼女の純真な気持ちが裏切られたことが何よりも彼女を傷つけた。
It was childish, but she'd earnestly wished to become the perfect wife. She trained to make that dream come true, and Mr. Daddy had generously offered his assistance. Some of it had been strange, unusual, and nigh unbearable, but it was all in order to become the perfect wife. No matter how repulsive his actions objectively were, she'd believed those were wonderful times that would help her fulfill her dream. Then one day, the adults suddenly barged in and flipped everything she'd believed in right on its head. Her parents and the police consoled her every time they met and spoke ill of Mr. Daddy. At first, Tsubakiko didn't understand any of it, but gradually she came to understand what had been done to her. At that moment, all negative and positives in her world were inverted.
忘れられないのね。
男なんか死ね、みんな死ね、死ね死ね死ね。
周りにとってはほんの数日でも、彼女にとってはあまりに長い時間があったのだと思う。彼女の心は彼女の身を守るために呪わしいその記憶を封じ込めることを選んだの。
封じ込めるというのは？
言葉通りよ。ある日を境にケロリと彼女はその日以前の記憶をきれいさっぱり失ってしまったの。心が彼女の記憶を封印したのね。彼女をこれ以上傷つけないように。
From that day onward, she was liberated from her suffering. But then she changed completely, as if denying everything she'd been up to that point.
簡単に言うと、著しい男性への嫌悪、恐怖の裏返しの攻撃性。彼女は次第に学校で衝動的に激しい感情をむき出しにして、男子と激しい喧嘩をするようになるの。それはどんどんエスカレートしていって、まるでかつての夢、素敵なお嫁さんから最も遠い存在になりたいかのように。
ヒコちゃんはそれで不良グループに？
彼女の激しい攻撃性はさぞや歓迎されたでしょうね。やがて彼女は彼女らの言うところの伝説、 武勇伝を次々に打ち立てていって新しいアイデンティティの形成に成功した。
Her innocent wish had led to the vilest betrayal from a man she trusted. So she fought to bury the sorrow and fury in her heart. Kiko's room probably looked a little disturbing to people seeing it for the first time, but it wasn't. That room was a testament to the strength and determination Kiko had wielded to crawl out from the depths of sorrow.
その彼女が高校入学を境にすっぱりと足を洗い、再び素敵なお嫁さんになるという夢を掲げた。それがどれほどたくましいことか、鈴原くんならわかるわよね。
All I could do was look to the ceiling and fight back the boundless rage and sadness that threatened to spill from my eyes. She'd chosen to trust and return to the dream that she'd been snatched from her as a child once again.
なんて強さ。
Now I understood what those words had meant. This year is the 9th year. How terrified she must have felt remembering this was the year that his sentence ended.
これは霊障なんかじゃない。
ええ、おそらくこれは霊障じゃない。彼女の忘れることのできない心の痛みなのよ。
I understood now. Kiko was afraid of that man returning once he was released from prison. That fear was what truly plagued her.
その心の痛みをキコちゃんは突然思い出した。
Recalling it out of the blue for no reason sounded too good to be true. Kiko was a strong girl who'd faced the pain in her heart over several years. It was hard to believe she'd just suddenly revert to fear without any trigger.
まさかとは思うけど。
その男を見かけたとか。どうしたのキコちゃん。
ハルミヤ、さっきから後ろばっか振り返ってるぜ。
自転車に乗ってるときはあまりそういうのは良くないと思うな。
ごめんごめん。私はいい子だから車が来ないかいつも安全確認を怠らないの。
なんかグレートなことでもしたか？まるで尾行を気にしてるスパイみたいだぜ。
無理しないで休んだ方が。
いいの、家より学校の方が安全だと思うから。学校ってほら大勢いるじゃない。大勢いればその変な人も手出ししにくいだろうし。
まさかその男は本当に帰ってきたんじゃ。
模範囚なら刑期短縮もあり得るわ。今年は9年目、いつ町に帰ってきてもおかしくない。
はい、もしもし、春宮でございます。ああ、どうもすみません。今参ります。すみません。ごめんね、椿子。ほら、新しい冷蔵庫、業者さんが持ってきてくれたの。すぐに戻るからちょっとだけ行ってくるわね。どうする？お母さんと一緒に下に行く？
大丈夫。行ってきて。でもすぐに帰ってきて。
すぐに戻るわね。それまでゆっくり休んでて。
Mrs. Harumiya left Tsubakiko's room. A small truck with a refrigerator on its bay was parked outside. Mrs. Harumiya hurried down the stairs. An unsettling pair of eyes observed that from a nearby alley.
Papa がお嫁さんを買いに来たよ。
Tsubakiko heard the clatter of someone trying to open the door. She wondered if her mother was back. Clatter, clatter, clatter. Clatter, clatter. They seemed to have trouble unlocking it.
お母さん、大丈夫？鍵開けようか。
Clatter, clatter, clatter. Clatter, 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 clatter. Something wasn't right. It was like they were trying to force the lock open with the wrong key. Tsubakiko's body went numb with absolute fear. It was him. It couldn't possibly be anyone else. He must have brought a spare key to enter her room. She was sure of it. I have to call for help. No, I have to put the chain up. But going over to the clattering door to put up the chain was scarier than anything else. So all she could do was stand frozen in fear. Click. Just then, the door handle turned with a light sound and slowly opened. Tsubakiko was petrified, like an animal in its den cornered by a vicious predator. She could only watch as the visitors showed themselves. Her voice refused to come out. She simply flapped her lips like a beached fish, because the intruder was none other than... The man lunged forward in his dirty shoes the moment Tsubakiko tried to scream. His thick hand covered her mouth. He'd cunningly locked the door and the chain at some point. The man pushed Tsubakiko onto her bed, his hand stifling her screams. No matter how hard she struggled, Tsubakiko was no match for the man's strength and physique. He slowly but surely approached her face and planted his filthy lips on her. The stench of plaque and sweat spread through her mouth, bringing back a nightmare of that day. Tsubakiko, Tsubakiko, poor thing, poor thing. Huh? Why are you saying that? I don't understand. Where's Mr. Daddy? Why did the police take him away? He was a bad man. A bad man. He'll pay. He'll pay. Honey, honey, stop it. Stop it. Not in front of Tsubakiko. In front of Tsubakiko. Listen, Tsubakiko. That man was a very bad person. He did horrible, horrible things to you and called it wife training. Mr. Daddy was a bad person. That's right. That's right. He tricked you into doing terrible, terrible things with him. How dare he do that to Tsubakiko? Tsubakiko, he'll pay. He'll pay. Honey, stop it. Honey, stop it. Violence. Violence won't solve anything. Tsubakiko. Tsubakiko. That man tricked you. Tsubakiko slowly staggered to her feet and screamed. Her face was contorted into a mask of ferocity, as it always was when she beat back her terror with rage. Regardless, however, that was her strength. Wham! The floor shook with a rumble. Dust fell from the ceiling. A giant blob was creeping down the stairs. That hideous freak of nature was him, no doubt about it. Tsubakiko's trusty metal bat had appeared in her hands out of nowhere. She raised it and charged. Tsubakiko pummeled the blob over and over. It groaned and shook each time. She struck the blob again and again with that defiant roar. However, she didn't know if her attacks were working on the towering creature. They only looked as effective as a child hitting something with a rolled-up newspaper. But Tsubakiko didn't lose heart. Her fighting spirit blazed fierce as ever. The blob's disgusting shape was his obese stomach she'd seen back then, when her eyes only reached up to that level. It only looked this big to her because of the impression it left when she saw it that day. Tsubakiko's valiant assaults continued when she saw the abhorrent blob. Anyone who knew what pain she'd suffered would tear up at the valiant struggle she mustered. It was a sign of how much she'd grown. Unfortunately, reality wasn't so kind. Her swings grew slower with time as she gasped for air. Even she had no choice but to accept her attacks were ineffective. Seizing that chance, long tongues like tentacles extended from the blob's obese stomach and ensnared the bat. They swallowed it in the blink of an eye, crunching loudly on the metal. The blob's roar and foul breath startled Tsubakiko. Just then, it charged at her like a giant toad. She was overwhelmed by its vast size in the blink of an eye. Tsubakiko fought hard, but she had no way of resisting the giant blob leaning over her. No matter how hard she struggled, it only drilled home that she was powerless against the blob. Her body was giving out faster than her heart. She continued cursing as she fought to keep her spirit from yielding. The blob's drool dripped onto her face. And as the hideous creature's lips and tongue desecrated her own without reserve, she heard her heart shatter. Tsubakiko shed bitter tears. She shut her eyes and mouth, a small bit of resistance against the man licking her face over and over. As much as she hated to admit it, she knew she didn't stand a chance against an adult, a man, him. She tried to act tough, but she was little more than a doll to an adult man. So all she could do was be a doll until he was done playing with her. She couldn't stop weeping from the pain and sorrow of having her very autonomy denied. Eventually, the blob stepped back and picked her up. She could resist no further. After all, she was already a doll. Her limbs had become ball-jointed at some point. The blob bent her joints and played with her like the doll she was. After this, he'd play with her in those filthy adult ways, just like back then. If she was destined to feel such pain, then she wished her heart could have been the same as it was that day. That innocent day when she believed that she would become a wonderful wife someday if she put up with his training. If she was still as innocent, then it wouldn't have hurt nearly as badly. Call him Daddy. Her fate was to be the wife of this hideous monster.
Kiko ちゃん、君は無力なんかじゃない。君は本当に強いよ。僕は知っているから。スズム、どこなの？助けて！ けるのは僕じゃない。キコちゃん、君の力で己を救うんだ。
Suzumu had suddenly appeared in this crazy world. Though he looked the same as always, he had this nearly divine aura about him. His eyes blazed scarlet and glared at the blob with conviction.
お前に名乗る名など僕は持ち合わせない。喋るな。お前の邪悪にヘドが出る。
Though Suzumu was the smaller one, he was clearly intimidating the blob.
お前の正体は分かっている。だからもうのさばるな。
The blob moaned and shrunk back. Now free, Tsubakiko staggered to her feet.
進む。
キコちゃん、君にはできる。そいつを倒せる。
無理だよ。弱な私の力じゃ大人には、男には。
そいつは大人でも男でもない。人間でもない。化け物でさえない。お前には存在さえない。お前などただ通り過ぎるだけで形を失う煙以下の存在。なぜならお前はお前はすでに2年前獄中で病死しているじゃないか。
The blob screamed and writhed. Blisters appeared all over its body and ruptured one after another, like it was being burned on the inside. Faced with the fact that it no longer existed, the blob collapsed, unable to maintain its form.
キコちゃん、その男はすでに存在しない。二度と君を悲しませることはない。できないんだ。君の心の傷を具現化し、再び君を苦しめようとする悪意が取ったかりそめの姿に過ぎない。君なら乗り越えられる。僕はキコちゃんの力を知っている。キコちゃん、今こそ悪夢を叩き潰して君の手で打ち勝つんだ。
Tsubakiko realized she was no longer a doll. The metal bat was lying at her feet.
てめえ、もう死んでるのかよ。私の前に二度と現れられねえのかよ。笑えら。じゃあ私は意もしない男が現れるのにビビってたってのかよ。バカにしやがって。この野郎。
Tsubakiko's rage revived her fighting spirit. Things were different this time around. Each time Tsubakiko swung the bat, The blob was smashed. It groaned and retreated. Tsubakiko smote the blob with righteous indignation. All the sorrow and anguish from all those years back surged forth with every swing. Eventually, a man's head poked up from the crushed blob. It was the same man from Tsubakiko's nightmares.
私は素敵なお嫁さんになるんだ。その夢、お前なんかに終わらされてたまるかよ。滑舌悪いんだよ、クソデブ。てめえ消えろ。食らってぶちまけて撃つやがれ。血まみれ天女特攻隊長春宮椿子、てめえにこの一撃をくれてやら。
The blob burst into light the moment the bat smashed into the man's forehead. Tsubakiko fell to her knees like a stringless puppet. Having defeated her trauma with her own hands, she fell deep into a sea of sleep. Its waters enveloped her gently and affectionately. Just then, a figure with antlers emerged from the light.
なんと
The divine curse was beside herself. Not even she could have imagined Tsubakiko overcoming the manifestation of her mental trauma by her own hands.
鈴め、恐ろしい男。
感謝する。君のおかげでヒコちゃん、心の傷を自ら乗り越える機会が得られた。あの化け物を僕の手でなく彼女自身の手で倒す機会を与えてくれたことを僕は感謝する。
お前はこの場で消さねば必ずや我らの悲願の邪魔になる。
The divine curse raised her hands, and a giant hatchet appeared with radiant light. Its thick blade alone was as tall as Suzumu. But Suzumu wasn't afraid. Quite the contrary. His face brimmed with gratitude towards the divine curse.
感謝を込めて神に報じる。
Suzumu slowly raised his fist and made his dedication. Dazzling light gradually gathered in that fist.
我らの悲願、兄上様のご無念を晴らすこと。邪魔立てはさせぬぞ、鈴原進む、陸奥の末裔。
覇者検証、邪悪を破りて正しきを示す。
死ねー。
あー
Afterwards, Kiko was suspended from school for 3 days as punishment for fighting the delinquents. However, those days were no doubt peaceful for her. As for why, Miss Hinagata came to her door with a copy of a document proving that man had grown ill in prison and died. That single sheet of paper set her free from the pain that had festered in her heart for the last 9 years.
今日はありがとうございます。これでキコちゃんも安心できると思います。
最近は犯罪者の人権にもうるさいからね。この書類手に入れるの苦労したのよ。
その会話絶対にあったと思います。
そうね。彼女の心の傷が紙切れ1枚で癒せるなら本当にお安いご用だわ。 明日から登校だけど大丈夫そう？
大丈夫だと思います。でも喧嘩騒ぎのことでみんなが噂してないか気にしてますね。
まああっけないくらいみんなもう噂なんかしてないしね。
The fight was the talk of the school when it happened, but those who hadn't seen it themselves find it hard to believe a single girl had beaten up all those delinquents entirely on her own. What's more, said delinquents had kept quiet on the matter, too embarrassed to admit they'd been trounced by a girl. The rumor mill had stopped grinding in just 3 days. After all, no one believed such a dainty girl with dreams of becoming the perfect wife was actually the former leader of the Bloodstained Angels attack squad. Besides, Natsu and I had done some work on our own, so Kiko could return to the school in peace. The afternoon air was crisp. Kiko dropped by as I was practicing in the yard. Her face was bright, as if a heavy load had been lifted from her shoulders.
いい顔してるね。
気分のいい夢を見たから。
どんな夢？
ちょっと乱暴な夢だから内緒。でもすっごいスカッとした。久々に晴れ晴れとした気持ち。
それはよかった。
ねえ、スズム。
なんだい？
あの日さ、スズムが言ってくれた言葉。お前ごときにキコちゃんをお嫁にやれるものか。
そんなことを言っちゃったかな。あの時は僕も勢いでつい。
すっごい嬉しかった。スズムの私を守るって気持ち、すっごい温かくて頼もしかったよ。
照れるな。
私さ、素敵なお嫁さんになるって夢、また叶えようとしてもいいんだよね。
もちろんさ。ただのお嫁さんじゃない。素敵なお嫁さんだよ。キコちゃんがお嫁に行くときは必ず僕がチェックするよ。キコちゃんを素敵なお嫁さんにできる相手かどうかをしっかりね。
嬉しいな。ありがとう、スズム。いや、これは喜んじゃいけないことかな。
Kiko furrowed her eyebrows, but her face was all smiles. After Kiko returned to school for the first time in days, she was swarmed by our classmates. Her eyes went wide with confusion.
何？おはようみんな。噂聞いたわよ。椿子、ムカつく不良グループをやっつけたんだって。
いつも駐輪場で食べ乗ってるドキュンどもをフルボッコにしたそうじゃん。マジ超強え。
何しろ春宮はグレート硬派だからな。不良どもには容赦がねえ。
あの駐輪場にいつもいる連中、感じ悪くて嫌だったのよね。
春宮がやっつけてくれてからあいつらすっかりおとなしくなったらしいぜ。
Natsu and I had spread rumors like while Kiko was absent. The delinquents had gotten into a fight with Kiko after she'd warned them to quit messing with others, and she'd wiped the floor with all of them. Those rumors had reached the delinquents too, of course, but they hadn't said anything. It was only natural. They probably didn't want to get mixed up with Kiko again after what she'd put them through. Kiko hadn't imagined in her wildest dreams that she'd received a hero's welcome. Embarrassed, she declined everyone's badgering for details of her heroic tale and sat herself down. Thanks to Miss Hinagata's careful machinations, Kiko's reputation remained mostly intact with the teachers, too. Kiko owed it all to her positive behavior so far. Psychological episodes and sudden outbursts were not uncommon during adolescence. Kiko's episode would likely be chalked up to as one of those and be quickly forgotten. Fortunately, it didn't seem like the delinquents were badly hurt either. I felt a little bad for them, but at least we could put the whole thing behind us.
おや、姉御、3日間の長いお勤め、お疲れ様でやした。
春宮先輩の武勇伝、1年生の間でも有名でしたよ。男子なんか舎弟にしてもらいたいとか、姉御と呼ばせてもらいたいとか、大した浮かれようで。
かわいい顔してやるもんだね。
みんなもそれくらいにしてあげて。本人は気にしてるんだから。
もうみんなに散々言われて慣れたというか諦めたというか。
俺たちもこれからは春宮のこと姉子って呼ぼうぜ。
いやだ、もう一度姉子言うたらドタマ勝ち割るぞこら。
ああ、姉子堪忍を。
言ったな、ぬっころす、祭る、血祭るぞ、熱田夏也。
Kiko's face was cheery as she chased Natsu around the room.
アイドルだったら喧嘩騒ぎとか下手すると命取りなんですけどね。春宮先輩の場合、逆にポイントアップしててなんだか羨ましいです。
そんなので羨ましがられたくないよ。
3年の男子でもキコチンに惚れたって言ってるの結構いるよ。特に空手部とか柔道部とかバトル系の連中が仲良しになりたいなってラブコールしてるよ。
雨降ってなんとやらですね。先輩の下駄箱がラブレターでいっぱいになるのも時間の問題だったりして、
その中の誰か一人を選ぶまで男たちにたくさん言い寄られるね。
グレートだね、モテモテだぜ。
その中にきっとキコちゃんを素敵なお嫁さんにしてくれる人がいるんじゃないかな。
何他人事なんだか。私をお嫁にやれるかどうかはスズムがしっかり判断することなんだから。
え、そうなの？
でもスズムのお眼鏡にかなうような人じゃないと、とてもじゃないけどスズムには紹介できないよ。私の彼氏になるのはちょっとハードかもだね。
スズム以上の男か。
ハードル高いどころの話じゃないですね。
キコちゃん、そんなこと言ってたらお嫁さんに行けなくなっちゃうんじゃない？
そうかな。そうかもだね。スズムのハードルが高すぎるせいで私が今期を逃しちゃったらスズムのせいかもだね。
そんな、僕のせいにされちゃうの？
おいおい春宮、グレートスサーラにだって素敵なお嫁さんを探す権利があるんだぜ。
校庭にウルトラレアカードが落ちてない？
なんだと？どこ？
Right when Natsuya tried to leap from the window to the schoolyard. Tsubakiko grabbed Suzumu a bit roughly and planted a kiss on his lips. Kane, Didiya, and Suzumu himself were wide-eyed with shock.
スズムには素敵なお嫁さんを探す権利なんて必要ないの。私が今予約しちゃったから。
でも僕より素敵な人が現れるかもよ。
絶
全身全霊をかけてそんな人は生涯現れないし、もし現れても関係ないから。
見せつけてくれちゃうね。鈴原先輩より素敵な人が現れないという点には同意します。でも鈴原先輩にとって春宮先輩より素敵な人が現れないとは限りませんからね。そうそう、年上の女房は銀のわらじを履いてでも探せって言うしね。現役アイドルが一般男性と結婚なんてよくあることですしね。
Tsubakiko punched her palm with a daring smirk.
祀られてえか、命知らずが。春宮椿子、てめえらの喧嘩買ってやら
So we have Tsubakiko's ending, but there is still one more story to be told.
Oh!
まさかそなたまでも返り討ちとはな。だがそなたの、いやそなたらすべてのすすと無念を我に受け継がれた。
Once, 4 of them had sat in this desolate doll memorial hall. Now, only 1 was left. It symbolized how Suzumu had foiled his assailants at every turn. But it was also a symbol of how the divided Soot had now gathered as one. The Soot not only symbolized the curse, it made its manifestation even stronger. She heaved a sigh. It was heavy and full of malediction. That act alone burst several doll heads. She slowly stood up and opened her eyes. That act alone created thunder and robbed the sky of its brilliance.
十分なすす、十分な呪い、十分な力。無論、十分な災厄を起こせるやもしれぬが、妹たちをことごとく返り討ちとしたあやつめを無視することはできぬな。あれのすすをすすろうぞ。そしてこの力をも超える呪いにてこの地に災いを。
I felt the unease, no, the pain of another boulder in my stomach. And why don't we stop it there? This is audapostrophe. You've been watching Iwaihime on PC. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream.